graves.
The Government of Canada now recognizes that it was wrong to forcibly remove children from their homes, and we apologize for having done this.
I stand facing the haunting remains of what was once a Canadian Indian residential school. From 1828 to 1997, over 150,000 Indigenous children are forcibly taken from their families and brought to places like this. The goal? To assimilate them into white settler society, stripping them of their culture and identity.
More than 150,000 children were forcibly taken from their homes between the 1880s and the late 1990s and placed in distant boarding schools.
The act to promote the gradual assimilation of the Indian tribes of Canada is just enacted, providing the legal framework for the residential school system. The government funds these schools, and they are administered by the Catholic, Anglican, Methodist, Presbyterian, and United Churches. Imagine young children, just like Phyllis Webstad, 6 years old, being taken from their families. They are cutting her hair, stripping away her gray shirt, a gift from her grandmother, and with it, her identity. She is not alone. Over 4,000 such children are dying in these schools, buried in unmarked graves to keep costs low. The true number of deaths could range between 6,000 and 25,000. It's October 16, 1966. Chanie Wenjack, a 12-year-old Anishinaabe boy, is escaping from the Cecilia Jeffrey Indian Residential School in Kenora, Ontario. This is the beginning of a harrowing journey. Chanie, along with 2 friends, is heading to his uncle's home, more than 600 kilometers away. With no provisions, no warm clothing, and no knowledge of the vast distance ahead, they are determined to get home. Here, Chanie says goodbye to his friends. He is now alone following the railway tracks, hoping they will lead him home. But the weather is getting colder, and Chanie is not equipped to survive the journey. Chanie's journey is a desperate attempt to escape the harsh conditions of the residential school. He is enduring beatings, hunger, and isolation. His story is tragically common among Indigenous children in these schools. In these schools, children are forbidden from speaking their native languages. They are punished severely for any resistance. The goal is to erase their culture entirely. On October 22, 1966, Chanie Wenjack is found dead by the railway tracks. He dies of exposure just 60 kilometers into his journey. He's clutching a little glass jar, his only possession.
In the summer of 2021, hundreds of bodies were discovered in an unmarked grave near a former residential school in British Columbia.
Chanie's death becomes a symbol of the suffering endured by thousands of Indigenous children. It sparks outrage and brings national attention to the abuses within the residential school system. For many families, the news of their children's fate comes as a delayed and painful blow. The residential school system not only robs them of their children, but also of their right to grieve and seek justice. Today, Chanie Wenjack is remembered through the Secret Path Project, a multimedia project by Gord Downey and Jeff Lemire, which aims to shed light on his story and the broader horrors of the residential school system. We are learning from Chanie's story and the countless others. Their voices are now echoing through the halls of history, demanding to be heard, remembered, and honored.
There's nothing on the surface, but once we interpret the data, we can see if we can find these children.
It's May 2021. We are standing at the site of the former Kamloops Indian Residential School in British Columbia, where ground-penetrating radar is revealing a grim discovery. Sarah Beaulieu, an anthropologist, is leading the search. The radar is detecting 215 unmarked graves of children, some as young as 3 years old. This discovery is shocking the nation.
What lies beneath the ground?
There is unmarked graves there. They're all over the place, but nothing has been done.
Here, some residential schools survive.
According to Sarah Beaulieu, these anomalies are consistent with the size and shape of potential graves. The evidence suggests that these are the final resting places of children who never made it home. Similar searches are underway at other residential school sites across Canada. At the former Marieville Indian Residential School in Saskatchewan, 751 unmarked graves are being identified. At St. Eugene's Mission School in British Columbia, 182 graves are being found. A researcher laments how uncovering graves at nearly every site shows the scale of this tragedy, which is immense. Despite overwhelming evidence, there are those who deny the existence of these graves. Residential school denialism is a disturbing trend that seeks to minimize or outright dismiss the atrocities committed. Justice Minister David Lametti shares a concerned note. In 2023, I am stating that I am open to outlawing residential school denialism. We must confront the truth and acknowledge the suffering of Indigenous communities. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission, established in 2008, is documenting these findings and the testimonies of survivors. This is a critical step towards acknowledging and addressing this dark chapter in Canadian history.
About it, there are children.
You look at your map and you could just draw circles so we could find out exactly where these graves are.
The First Nation has invited archaeologists to search for unmarked graves, and survivor testimony will be crucial. Elders have long shared stories of what happened at these schools.
Thankfully, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is a monumental effort to bring justice and healing to survivors of the residential school system. Over 6 years, the Commission collects more than 6,750 survivor and witness statements. Survivor testimony, Evelyn Corkmas.
I've waited 50 years for this apology, and finally today, I heard it. And unfortunately, a lot of my family members, friends, classmates, and members of my community that went to residential school were not able to hear it because they had passed on, because they could not endure or live with the trauma that they endured in these residential schools.
The Commission's final report, released in 2015, includes 94 calls to action, addressing the need for accountability, reparations, and systemic change. I walked through a library, examining the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's final report. I noticed the report finds that at least 4,037 children died in the residential schools, though the actual number is likely much higher. It calls this a cultural genocide, urging all Canadians to acknowledge the truth and work towards reconciliation. In October 2022, the House of Commons of Canada unanimously passes a motion recognizing the residential school system as genocide. This acknowledgement is a significant step towards justice for Indigenous peoples. Communities are coming together, sharing their stories, and demanding change. The voices of survivors are powerful, their stories heartbreaking.
Embarrassing, belittling. I left there, I was totally broken. I was totally despondent.
Many of us were sexually abused by the Grey Nuns, by the brothers, by the Roman Catholic priests.
The journey towards healing is long and difficult. But with each story told, each grave uncovered, and each act of acknowledgement, Canada moves closer to understanding and repairing the harm done to its Indigenous peoples. We are learning from the past, guided by the strength and resilience of those who endured unimaginable suffering. Their stories are now a part of our collective history, a history we must never forget. It's July 2022. Pope Francis is visiting Canada to offer a historic apology for the role of the Catholic Church in the residential school system. Pope Francis, I am deeply sorry for the ways in which regrettably many Christians supported the colonizing mentality of the powers that oppressed the Indigenous peoples. I humbly beg for forgiveness. For many, this apology is a crucial step towards healing. It acknowledges the deep wounds inflicted by the Church's participation in this genocidal system. Across Canada, communities are setting up memorials to honor the lost children. In Vancouver, the art gallery steps are covered with 215 pairs of children's shoes, a stark reminder of the lives cut short at the Kamloops residential school. Each pair of shoes represents a child who never came home. We must remember them and ensure such atrocities never happen again. The National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation is playing a vital role in preserving the history and stories of survivors.
It is important for Canadians to start somewhere and ultimately to create those tools of reconciliation that will live.
Their work ensures that future generations will learn about this dark chapter and the resilience of Indigenous peoples. In a candlelight vigil, families and survivors are gathering to honor the lost children. Tears flow freely as they remember their loved ones and the unimaginable suffering they endured. The legacy of the residential school system is sad in Canadian history. As the nation moves forward, the stories of the survivors and the memories of the lost children remain a testament to the resilience of Indigenous peoples. It is our collective responsibility to ensure that the history of the residential schools is remembered, and that we work towards a future where such atrocities can never happen again.
Thousands of children died in Indian residential schools. Sterilization happened en masse to Indigenous women. We know that there were outright mass murders.